All right, looks like we got a great crowd of attendees going here right now. Thank you all again so much for joining us for this afternoon's keynote speaker, part of our umbrella group Women's History Month Symposium this year. We're going to get to hear from Dr. Pollard in just a moment, but before we do, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping things for this speaker. So everyone, just please make sure that you are muted and your cameras are off. And this session is going to be recorded and will be posted on the UMB website at some point after this event today. And then we will have an opportunity at the end of the speaker's talk to go over some questions. So if you do have questions for Dr. Pollard at any point in time throughout her talk, you can go ahead and put those in on the chat function. That's the speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. Type in your questions at any point in time and we will get to them at the end of her speech. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to our VP and Chief Business and Finance Officer, Dawn Rhodes.
Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's keynote speaker event. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, the president of Montgomery College, Dr. Darian Pollard. As a leader of the three-campus community college in Montgomery County, Maryland, Dr. Pollard is a dynamic speaker, a first-generation college graduate, a community leader, wife, and mother. She was named one of Washington's 100 Most Powerful Women by Washingtonian Magazine in 2012, received a Visionary Award for the Washington Area Women's Foundation in 2015, and won an Academic Leadership Award from the Carnegie Corporation of New York in 2017. Since assuming her role as president in 2010, Pollard's leadership has led to the development of a new mission and strategic plan for her institution. She has also partnered with Montgomery County Public Schools and the Universities of Shady Groves in creating ACES, standing for Achieving Collegiate Excellence and Success, a program designed to help disadvantaged students transition from high school to college completion. Pollard received her bachelor's and master's degrees in English from Iowa State University and earned a PhD in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies and Higher Education from Loyola University, Chicago. Here with us today to share her story, her strive for balance in a demanding world, and to discuss her journey back to the office after a life-changing 6-month sabbatical, let's please welcome Dr. Darian Pollard.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you all so much for the invitation. And that was such a warm introduction. Deeply grateful. And I love seeing your name is Dawn right before I'm speaking because my sister's name is Dawn. So there's something to be said, I think, about that familiarity it bred for me. So thank you all so much. It's great for me to be with you today from my home in Clarksburg, Maryland. And it's funny how that doesn't sound strange anymore. It seems that, in fact, just this time last year, I was actually on the calendar to deliver this very same speech to you all at UMBC. So a year later, here we are, still talking about the same types of issues in a virtual space. I think with some new psychological and professional challenges. Now, many of them have been exacerbated, I think, by COVID. So I'm grateful to be talking about them and the idea of balance with you today. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Montgomery College, but let me give you a little bit of context I think might help set my comments up for you. We are a comprehensive community college serving approximately 56,000 students on 3 campuses and 2 workforce development locations with about 3,000 employees at Montgomery College. We are a gloriously diverse institution. 72% of our students are students of color, and we have about 8,500 Pell Grant students each year. So we put a lot of work in and take great pride as an organization in serving those who wouldn't be able to go to college without the robust support of an institution such as Montgomery College. But we're not only educators, but on some level, I think that we're also social workers, mentors, life coaches, and financial counselors. Any of you who straddle the worlds of professional life and parenting or family care know that these latter roles are oftentimes more taxing than any of us even really acknowledge. They're the ones that don't end at 5 p.m. and they don't shut down on weekends. And a lot has been said about the strain on women during COVID and how many of them have chosen to leave the workforce because of the impossibility of working and homeschooling and all those other things at the same time. There are some very important questions to unpack there at a later date about income inequality and gender. But there are some issues that are facing us right now that are very unique to this COVID moment, and I think create some true challenges to the idea, or maybe I say the ideal of balance. So let's start there. I know that we're all know that work doesn't end at 5 p.m. during COVID. I get emails from my employees at all hours of the night. In fact, we've been contemplating some level of an email ban on weekends and after a certain hour in the evening. But my coronavirus advisory team fields reports of COVID infections 24/7. Our public safety teams are patrolling the campuses around the clock, and their jobs have even become more critical now as they take on new health protocol responsibilities and watch out for facility concerns. In other words, COVID has complicated everyone's work considerably. And as my human resources director likes to say, we're not working from home, we're all living at work. Now, that's pretty much the antithesis of balance, isn't it? And I don't know there's any playbook for living through a public health emergency that lasts more than a year. Even the word emergency suggests that it was not supposed to last very long. And here we are a year later. I think I was invited to give this talk originally in pre-COVID times because I had taken, as someone mentioned earlier, Ms. Rhodes in her introduction, that I had some intentional efforts to reestablish balance in my life. Some of this work has been undone by COVID, but I still practice many of the steps. So let me take you back to 2019 when I decided to take a sabbatical for 6 months, ending in January of 2020. After 8 years as the college president, I needed to regroup and reassess. And when I took this time out, I did it with a plan for some inward looking and discovered that I really wanted to come back refreshed. But I also wanted to be able to show up differently. I wanted to be more authentic to the extent that I needed to do that. I wanted to be more myself. And that required me to do some work to get in here because, as one of my predecessors shared with me, who'd also had a sabbatical while in this role, she said, this role, if you do it well, will take everything out of you. It's very demanding, this community, this college. So if you want to be able to do this job for some time, you're going to have to teach the college and the community how to treat you. But more importantly, you're going to have to learn how to treat yourself. And I have to tell you, well, I didn't get that. When she said it then, I was a fresh college president here at Montgomery, just a few months into the job. And I thought, I'm high energy. I was, probably at that point, 40 years old. I thought this is something that I would know how to do fairly well. And what I've come to know about myself is that this idea of leadership, this idea of strong leadership, means that one must be more intentionally and, dare I say, deliberately connected to being in touch with oneself. Now, this kind of sounds paradoxical, right? Because leaders are supposed to be outwardly focused on guiding, on coaching, on inspiring others. But to do this work well without exhausting and giving up parts of yourself, you have to have some roots planted and know very clearly who you are. And to a certain extent, you have to protect who you are at given points in this work. Now, I know many of you at UMB are training in the helping professions, medicine, social work, law, and so many others. So you are probably pulled in the direction of serving others. And it took me a couple of decades to figure out that there's some serious self-care that was the only thing that was going to allow me to continue to do my work of serving others. So in my sabbatical, I started meditating regularly. It's a practice that I still do. And I got myself a trainer, I got a dietitian, I got a physician, and I lost some weight for health reasons, but not, and I need you to know, not for vanity's sake, because I thought I was doing okay in the looks department, but I knew that the high blood pressure or hypertension I had, the borderline diabetes that I had, the fact that my health was not at the level that I knew that it should be. It was compromising my ability to do my work as well as I wanted to. So doing this made me confront some challenges in myself, and working through them is what led me to a series of recommendations, 5 of them that I'm going to offer to you today that I'm using to frame my comments. And I'm going to start with the easiest one. Number 1, live simply. Many of us are blessed in a multitude of our lives. Many of us don't struggle for basic necessities. Many of us have the chance to get an education. Many of us have had some professional opportunities that have allowed us to be where we are. And many of us have people who love us, and we get to love them back. And I'm listing these things for myself as much as it is for this group, because these are the fundamentals, I believe, of life. Living simply means keeping a focus on the essentials. This allows us, dare I say, more space to live more fully. It keeps us out of stressing when things go awry that are relatively small in the big picture. Now, one of the tools I found in conjunction with meditation is the practice of gratitude. It profoundly changed my life several years ago when I read the book Simple Abundance, a day book that takes you through a series of actions and thoughts to help center you. And about 1 month into this, the author asks you to keep a gratitude journal. And I will tell you, this changed my life. Just taking the time to sit and breathe and say, let me be still. One of my favorite Bible verses, be still and know that I am God. For me, being still meant that I had to sit down and understand that I did not know everything and I didn't have to do everything. I find that slowing myself down and focusing on the fundamentals helped me to live more simply. It helps me from getting caught up in those short-term instant gratification fixes that really are just distractions from deeper issues. My wife points out to me gently, for example, that I might not need to get so excited about the idea of the Amazon truck stopping by the house every day during COVID. It helped me think that maybe I needed to identify and focus on being grateful for this experience in life that I have, and to put more intentionality in the simple things, the sun on my face, beautiful kisses from my family in the morning, the beautiful chai tea that I get to sip in the morning, my overabundance of cream that I put in it. But bringing myself back to my body is something that makes me less vulnerable in needing those distractions. In fact, I've come to value the practice of mindfulness. And one of my muses is Brene Brown, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. And one of her books, Dare to Lead, she helped me to be more conscious of this. It's also helped me to lead in a more compassionate and also self-compassionate way. Because Brown talks about how important self-compassion is, because it allows us to be more compassionate towards others. She writes, quote, talk to yourself the way you would talk to someone that you love. I don't know about you, but that kind of gets me every time I hear it. Most of us shame, belittle, and criticize ourselves in ways we never think of doing to others. So why do we give permission to ourselves to treat ourselves that way? Now, many of us are in positions in which we're driving ourselves all day long to get things done, to push others to get things done, to charge through resistance that sets us up to treat ourselves harshly. That will only end up filtering out to our colleagues or to our families if we don't take the time to live simply and to be in this moment right here. Recommendation number 2 to you in this space: give more. Now, we all know the adage that it really is the person who gives who receives the most. And we have all experienced that. You really get paid back in some kind of spiritual way when you give out from your excess or even from your scarcity, because that's even deeper. When you don't have much and you give, there's something very powerful in that exchange. If you have an employee who's having a trouble and seems stuck, I try to spend some extra time helping her to find the answer. Sometimes I even know the answer. People with children, you all know what I mean here, but it's more valuable if you can help someone else find that path to the answer themselves, because that discovery process is often more important than the answer itself. One day, a few years ago, my wife called me, Robin, from the office and called me at my office rather, and said, you need to come home. This was the middle of the day. And because there is an issue at home with our son. Now, I don't remember, to be quite frank, what meetings were on my calendar for that day, but I know as a college president, and many of you probably understand, there are people coming from outside the college into me, or I'm traveling to someone else's office to see them. I'm delivering certain comments in different places. But let me tell you, with clarity and without a second decision, I canceled them all. Because when my wife called me, and she doesn't call me home often in the middle of the day, I can probably count on one hand, maybe three fingers, the number of times that's happened. But there are times where a conversation has to happen in real time and not in the evening or 2 days later. This is one of those days. So I feel there is never enough time, but if I'm meditating regularly, time seems to warp a bit. I find that even if I spend 30 unscheduled minutes with an employee or with a friend or relative, that somehow that time always comes back to me. It reminds me of a time I was having a conversation with a faculty member. I was a dean, and I was at the copy machine making some duplication of something. And he stopped, and I said, oh, I need to talk to you about something. And in the course of what should have been a 3-minute conversation, I stopped to check the copy machine. 5 or 6 people walked past me to have a conversation, and I kept interrupting. So what should have been a 3-minute talk with him turned into a 15-minute. But in that 15 minutes, I had the clarity that he never looked away from me. He was focused in that minute. And I found that for me, I wasn't focused. I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't fully there. I wasn't giving just a little bit more of myself. So maybe not right away, maybe not an exact number of minutes, but I believe the universe opens up sometimes. We're paying attention. And oftentimes I found for myself, now that I'm paying attention, that it will give me back that time if I'm deliberate. And I don't know how it works, but I know that intention is a part of that. Being willing to be a leader in a space is important, but being able to give more, even when you might not think there is enough time or money or energy, is a very powerful thing. So my third suggestion to you is to expect less. So while we're giving more, a related tool is to expect less. This kind of seems paradoxical, right? There's an adage about one's happiness being inversely proportional to one's expectations. Now, lower expectations doesn't sound very aspirational, does it? No one gets up in the morning saying, hey, let's go have some low expectations today. What I think is meant by this is that we need to live with a fundamental awareness of other people's humanity. We are all imperfect. None of us are perfect beings. And humanity means vulnerability and flaws. This is especially true during COVID. People may not be their best selves when their children are climbing all over them on their Zoom call. That poor man with the cat filter not too long ago, when he was in the midst of a hearing in Congress, was not having his best day. But I was really impressed with the judge, who kept his cool and just simply said, sir, I think you have a filter on, and tried to talk him through it. Now, I have to remind myself of this when someone doesn't respond to an email in the expected time frame that I had. Not that I conveyed them what my expectation was, but in the back of my mind, I had already built a construct of when I expected them to get back to me. They may have had some things going on that I'm not aware of. There have been a lot of moments of grief and loss and sadness that couldn't publicly be shared because of our remote circumstances, but it's real to the people who are waking up in it every day. So I ask my colleagues to keep that in mind when you're frustrated with another colleague, when you're trying to understand why they haven't met you where you thought they needed to meet you. It's often important to remember that we don't know what they're bringing with them in the spaces and places that we operate. Now, I find that I'm able to accept this better when I'm also in touch with my own vulnerability. One of the things I'm prone to thinking is that I'm not carrying as much COVID-related stress because I'm not living on the edge financially or in danger of a job loss. Because of these fortunate circumstances, I often think, well, I should just be plowing ahead, y'all, working twice as hard. You know, dearie, you are so profoundly blessed. You have nothing to complain about. Now, if you ever thought that yourself, and I have oftentimes, I think we're missing a part of the reality in which we operate in. This year has been extraordinarily stressful for all of us. Even if we haven't experienced it personally, we have been surrounded by illness or by the threat of illness or loss during this period. We've all lived saturated by this anxiety about the virus and how to stay safe and how to keep our institutions running in the meantime, and how we need to keep our homes safe and make sure we wear our mask properly, and how to practice social distancing, and thinking now about a vaccine and wondering what the implications are for our workspace, our families, for our churches, our social gatherings. For those of you in leadership roles, there is also the responsibility that we carry the right messages and how to plan for the new economy, the new labor market, the plan for the new professional world. There are so many unpredictable variables and very few existing models to study. So that also becomes something that dictates and takes up so much residence in your mind, in your psyche, and sometimes is even unexamined. I find myself kind of spacing off sometime and thinking, oh, I hadn't thought about that. So now I live with Post-it notes by me all the time, so I can write down a note so I can come back to that later. This ties back to self-compassion too, because I'm able to be more compassionate with others when I'm taking time to take care of myself and to acknowledge the stress and anxiety that this moment brings to me, whether that's through meditation or exercise or doing something that feeds my spirit. Netflix comes to mind. I got an unhealthy fascination with a few shows right now. Many of us don't make that time because we're taking care of others. Now, I think this audience probably knows what I mean there, because there's some of you are working in hospitals or clinics or supporting those who do. Some of you are literally on the front lines of the pandemic, or you may be on the second line, taking care of people who have been impacted by the realities of COVID, be that in food insecurity or housing, which can be equally intense. At my own college, a third of our working students lost employment in the first 2 months of COVID-19, and 44% of them lost some wages. Those have been serious challenges for us, knowing about all of the need that is happening in the midst of us. That is something I've been struggling with, being able to take the time to center myself when I know how profoundly others are in need right now. But it's also an area in which COVID has taught me something. Partnerships in the times of peace can move mountains in times of crisis. Now, I have to tell you that we've had a lot of organization individuals who've stepped up in the last year to help us with food donations, technology gifts, access to resources, with advice and counsel. I was really astounded. It has been a terrific example of one of my leadership values about giving coming to fruition. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Another place of learning through COVID has been that when I step back for a little self-care, that's allowing someone else to step up and hone in on their skill sets. And I work with some of the most dedicated and talented people in my organization. And I have some staff people this year who have really grown into positions of more responsibility, in part because I was busy and I couldn't take it on. And I knew that, and I stepped back in spaces, but I tapped into talent that was sitting right there in front of me that was necessary. I've made a mental note to myself about that dynamic so I can remind myself to make room for that when we're not in crisis, right? So sometimes the gifts of COVID, I actually have a Post-it note started on my desk about that. The gifts of COVID is this recognition that there's untapped talent around us. And those of us who think that we have to be in charge all the time, here's the dirty secret, y'all. We don't have to be in charge all the time. There are other people who may be more talented, have more capacity, more insight, who we need to move into spaces and places to take on these leadership roles. So if you're having trouble giving yourself permission for self-care time, try thinking of it as a leadership opportunity for someone else. Sharing the burdens can have some unexpected surprises as well. Now, I want to return to my muse, Brene Brown, and mention another of her books called Braving the Wilderness, in which she talks about belonging to oneself. Isn't that a great phrase? Belonging to oneself. One of my favorite quotes of all times is to stand in your own space and know that you're there. I think that's what she means when she talks about belonging to oneself. I often talk about helping students to feel included at Montgomery College. Many are first generation college students. Many are immigrants. Some are single parents working low wage jobs. For some of these students, belonging to a community is what will get them through their circumstances. Now, I really stress this whenever I talk about culture and achievement because it's something that's intrinsic to community colleges. Meeting students where they are and nurturing their whole life experience, not just their classroom performance. What Brene Brown teaches is that we also need to belong to ourselves. That means looking inward, taking some stock of strengths as well as weaknesses and owning them. Now, she writes this beautifully when she says, quote, true belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Sounds pretty profound, doesn't it? It's one of my favorite ideas, this idea of how are you going to show up? But being who you are is truly a lifelong process. The closer we get to it, I believe, the more we can really serve others because we're all works in progress, because we are all trying to understand the inner landscapes that help us connect with other people more deeply and help us interpret and manifest who it is we want to show up as in the spaces we inhabit, whether that be home, work, office, social service spaces that we live in. So live simply, give more, expect less. Now, I've been building up to these concepts from the easiest to the hardest to offer my last two to you. Number 4, free your mind from worry. Now, I know this is harder than it sounds, and I had a reconciliation moment about this a few years ago, literally the weekend before I was supposed to start my presidency at Montgomery College. I got a call that my father was in critical care and was getting ready to pass, they believed. My sister called me from the hospital in Chicago, and I was literally in Maryland. Actually, I was on my in Las Vegas on my way back home to Maryland to start my job that following Monday. And my sister calls me crying. Now, to understand how significant this was, you need to understand my mother died when I was very young, and my father was my primary caretaker. And my sister and I are daddy's girls through and through. And we had a deep affinity to taking care of our father, even to this day, because he survived this situation. But I will tell you that I had to make a decision. As I'm sitting with my father, I fly into Chicago and realize I'm going to need to stay there for a while. I had to call my board chair and I had to say, Dr. Lynn, I need to share with you that this man, who is my father, who is at this point the most significant parental figure in my life, is in a health situation, a crisis, that I will not be able to be at work on Monday to start my job. And knowing me, the way he had come to know me, he says, Deering, you're exactly where you are. But I thought about this fear about my father's help, about a new job, about whether my new colleagues would think that I was unreliable. And as a woman, I think, if I'm gonna be honest with you all, I felt more pressure to prove that I could be a leader and balance a family. So when I called the college and told them that I was going to be a week late, and I sat down and I penned a letter to the college community, and I told them that I needed to be with my father. It was very clear to me that I had to put aside the worry because my priorities were very clear. I've done a lot of therapy to know that it meant something for me at that moment to make that choice. Years later, probably even just a couple weeks ago, people at the college still mention this to me, that they saw this as a moment. They saw me as a woman who made a choice for my family, but I was still able to claim my seat at the leadership table because I defined my narrative. I took my space, I prioritized what was important, but I explained it in a way that they understood so that they could anticipate consistently from that point forward how I was going to show up in my role as a college president. So while it was stressful, I am clear about my values, and I knew that my priorities would help me put that worry aside. Now, this has served me well on a number of occasions. One of the things that Brene Brown writes about is that calm is contagious. So as a leader, if I go into a tailspin about something, that usually doesn't help my colleagues or my institution. And Brown has two steps you can take. She says, ask yourself, quote, do I have enough information to freak out about the situation? And number two, if I have enough data, will freaking out help? Now, these steps give me some tools to evaluate because I've had to remind myself of these steps several times during this COVID crisis at points where I had to make decisions about circumstances that I didn't have enough information about, like the transmitted, how quickly this virus transmits in the beginning, and to my decisions B, about how this would affect many people's health within the organization. In fact, these steps guided me to one of my best decisions of the pandemic, which was forming a leadership group to advise me. I gathered representatives from nursing, health sciences, communications, public safety, and facilities, and they have demonstrated some remarkable sophistication in advising me, especially in areas where I didn't have the expertise. So 5, getting back to my principles, here's the toughest one: freeing your heart from hatred. Now, this is maybe the hardest one of them all, because if you notice, many of the religious traditions that exist in our globe have some form of forgiveness in its creed. And that's because hatred is so heavy, it's corrosive. It weighs us down. It's like an anchor. And we can drag it around for so long that we don't even notice the weight that we are expanding and we put energy into it. That's the energy we don't have to put into our other life affirming things. Some years ago, I read about how Nelson Mandela forgave the people who imprisoned him for 27 years. I mean, really forgave them as he became friends with them and worked with them after his release. And I tell you, I'm not evolved that far yet, but I cling to these stories because I hold on to how you have to do that and how for 27 years he was imprisoned and the brutality of that. And I have to remind myself of it. Nelson Mandela was a great leader, but he was a better human being. And he missed seeing his children grow up, missed seeing grandchildren being born. If there is a power that allowed him to see past those things and let go and reach for something better than hatred, then there must be something for the rest of us, right? Now, Brene Brown touches on this too when she writes, to forgive is not just to be altruistic. It is the best form of self-interest. Isn't that something? The best form of self-interest. So forgiveness isn't even always about the other person. It's about you. Now, I've had to revisit this several times in the last year when I watched police violence against people of color become so rampant. And maybe not just so rampant, so seen. When our capital was overrun, when there was racism and xenophobia circulating in political discourse. These were painful episodes personally, and for many of us at Montgomery College. And I am so grateful for the organization I have the privilege of leading, because for us, our equity and inclusion team stood up some real-time Zoom calls, which drew hundreds of members of the college community so that folks could process these piercing realities and not get caught up in the hatred that was almost starting to paralyze so many of us. And I can tell you that we had some powerful conversations with students about these conditions and how threatened they felt by them. This is one of the instances in which showing up as my authentic self served me well as a college president. What do I mean by this? I shared my own fears about violence as a woman of color, as the mother of a brown boy. And I talked about my disappointment about our democracy that had become under assault. And I think what helped me get through this was talking about it, sharing my feelings and looking for allies, because allies help create balance. And there's an intentional equilibrium that we all have to work toward with ourselves: self-care, meditation, and gratitude. Then there's the movement beyond self, sometimes in services, sometimes in grief, sometimes in joy. More people have shown me photos of their newborns in the last year than ever before. I love it. They make them their screenshots in their Zoom calls. I've had people talk to me about great recipes, and we're sharing them, because this is all glue that binds us together. And although this has been a tough year, it has shown us some strengths that we may not have recognized. It has also been a year of achievement for women. Women are contributing at every level of our fight against COVID, from the director of the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, to our first female vice president, Kamala Harris. Having women in positions of leadership and science blazes the trail for young girls. I really believe that, because when you see it, you can conceive it. But we also need women crafting policy, like Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and pushing the boundaries of progressive thinking, like Neera Tanden. And she's one of my role models for calling people to action around poverty and equality. And I think she falls squarely in that expression of how people, how women well behaved seldom make history. Now, I'll be watching carefully to see where she lands after this period that she's been through. Another woman who made history this year, following in Maya Angelou's footsteps by reading her own poem at the presidential inauguration, the remarkable Amanda Gorman, who captured what I know many of us were feeling that historical day: angst, hope, conflict, all framed by the backdrop of our fragile democracy. The title of her poem, The Hill We Climb, is a wonderful metaphor for gender equity. We are making progress. Women are being recognized. The glass ceiling is being broken, but don't get it wrong, y'all. There is still so much work to do. Now, I want to end and open up for questions and dialogue and invite you to join in with me by highlighting a woman in my life who doesn't get as much visibility as I do. I'm very well aware that I could have very little in my life in terms of balance without my wife, Robin, who is the primary caretaker of our glorious 14-year-old son. Not only is she an incredible mother, she helps me to be the most effective leader, the most patient boss, the most tolerant friend, the most loving parent, because she's my truth teller. She reminds me I'm only the boss at Montgomery College. I'm not the boss at home. She's the one who reminds me who I am in moments when fear and vulnerability almost seem to consume me. When I forget about how to balance all of the things and the roles that I play, I turn to her. So on these rare occasions that I can't do that, I also remind myself that I am so blessed because I have someone in my life who grounds me. I hope that each of you has someone in your life that grounds you. But I keep these rules of thumb then in mind when I think about this work and how we approach this work and how we lead as women in the spaces and how we choose to show up in. Live simply, give more, expect less, free your mind from worry, free your heart from hatred. Now, I can't say that I do these every day. On a good day, I might hit 3 out of the 5. And on some days when I'm feeling particularly enlightened, I may hit 4. There are many things I can't control, but these are things that empower me personally. Holding these aspirations while also having compassion for myself and the acceptance of my own vulnerability is the tightrope I walk every day, just like every other person who's in this space with us right now. I'm just grateful to have people like you to share the journey with. I'm tremendously grateful to people in my life who remind me each and every day of who I am. And as I think about the Post-it note aspirations and inspirations that I have on my monitor, I wish you could see them, they're everywhere. I believe deeply that I am grateful for the people who I get to have on this journey who remind me that I'm not alone, because my well-being Your well-being is your birthright, and it's our job to fight for it, to protect it, and to lead with it. I thank you for the invitation to be here today and to offer some comments. And I look forward to stepping into a Q&A period with you and hopefully sharing some perspectives more with you and hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Pollard. That was great. We have so many comments coming in just talking about how inspirational and wonderful that talk was. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that.
Real quick, before we jump into the Q&A portion, we had one person asking if you could just go over the points one more time. Live simply. Then what else
Sure.
was there?
I'm
Yep.
happy to do that. And I appreciate that because that was the most important part. Live simply, give more, expect less, free your mind from worry, free your heart from hatred.
Awesome. I hope everyone's writing that down so they have it all. They can check that every day. So we do have a couple questions coming in. Our first one comes from Aaron Gudis, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your last name incorrectly. So Aaron, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. So I'm Erin Gaitis, and I loved your talk. It was super fabulous. And I loved your description of your wife as your truth teller.
Mhm.
And it made me think about that kind of relationship I have with my husband, and I think we tell each other the truth and it helps us. But it also made me wonder, what do you think about finding truth tellers for each of us at work as well?
Erin, I love your question. I think that all of us should have a certain collection of people in our network. One of them, as you describe, are truth tellers. These are people who oftentimes will say the things that others are fearful to say to you, or others may not feel comfortable enough saying to you. And you need to have some of them. Now, I will share with you, when you move further and further, quote unquote, up in an organization, it's harder to have those truth tellers, to find them, because people oftentimes become quite intimidated by your presence and the role you play. But I think when you're very intentional, you should have truth tellers at every level of the organization. So I know that there are a few people, and I'm getting ready to make a difficult decision, or one that I know might be somewhat controversial. There are people that I check in with because I know without a doubt they're going to be my truth tellers. They're going to be the ones who are going to say, Darian, here's something you need to think about. Or, you know what, Darren, you're blind to this perspective. Or, are you prepared? This is going to blow up. And let me tell you why this is going to blow up. If you don't have those people within your sphere of influence, because I mean, they have to influence you, then you're not doing your work well. That means you're listening just a few people. So I think you have to have those truth tellers around you at home, and you have to have them in your workplace. Here are other two groups of people I think you need to have with you. So if you got truth tellers, you also need to try and have a mentor and be a mentor. All right. This is very deliberate. None of us arrived at this work alone. Each of us had someone, hopefully, who gave you some perspective about the work you have. So this idea of having mentors who walk with you is deeply important, because oftentimes mentors can be your truth tellers, but sometimes mentors are your inspiration. Sometimes mentors are the ones who help you think deliberately through, a thought partner. And the third one I'll offer that you need to have with you after truth tellers and mentors: need sponsors. Sponsors and mentors are two very different things. Mentors are people, I think, who walk with you, who give you constructive feedback, insight, encouragement, guidance. Sponsors are people who make space for you in a room that you may not be there in if they were not there. They may never mentor you, but I have plenty of people at Montgomery College that I see their work, I understand their aspiration, and my job as a leader is to make sure that I am providing space for them at the table at which I'm a part of, or other tables that I'm not a part of that they need to be a part of. So truth tellers, mentors, and sponsors should all be a part of our network. Great question, Erin. Thank you.
Yeah, really wonderful way to break that down. Really just kind of put different people into positions that can help you succeed and move forward. That's great. So our next question is actually an anonymous question. This person asks, what was the main reason that you knew you needed to take a sabbatical? Were you concerned about how others would view your time away?
I have to say, the main reason I knew that I did it, I had a couple of things that transpired. One is I was getting tired. I'm a high energy person. Not too many of you know me personally, but I'm high energy, and I found that my energy was done. It was starting to come down. I wasn't creating the space to read and to spend as much time being aware of what was happening in my area. I needed that time to reflect. Quietly, the thing that I accept and embrace the most is that I'm a nerd, and I'm also an introvert. And I found that by this point, 8 years into this job, I had been giving away so much of my energy, and giving and giving and giving. That's a part of the job. I signed up for this. So to be very clear, I'm not rejecting the premise of what I was doing. I know what I was doing. But I also know that I need to be intentional to recharge. And for the same reason that we crafted this policy, oftentimes for faculty within our institutions, my college had the prescience to say, we will have staff and administrators who would need to take advantage of this as well. So I knew at that point that I needed to wanted to reground myself. I felt there was a movement getting ready to happen in higher education. I needed to be more intentional about. I knew that I needed to spend some time taking care of Darian, because my doctor called me up and she said, we were going over some test results. She said, Darian, she said, you're too smart for this. And I said, what? I kind of paused. She said, you're too smart for this. She said, and so she called me out on practicing what she called the 5 S's, and I'm not going to remember all of them. She said, but you need to get some sweat in your life. She said, you need to get sex in your life. And her point of saying sex was intimacy, the relationships you need to have. She talked about this idea of self-discipline. She talked about this idea of understanding myself, sacrifice for myself. So this was a very important conversation that happened. And I realized there was a unique moment that could happen for me to do this timing wise. Was I worried about, there's a certain ego that I think you have to have in this job that you do. Like, there's a reason why I'm the president. But I also realized, guess what? If I drop dead or I get hit by a bus walking out of here, I would hope the college might mourn me for a little while. I hope that they might mourn me. But then guess what? They're going to be doing a search in somebody else, because there's somebody else who can do this job. There are other people who can do this work. So if I had prepared my team, I should have the ability to be able to trust them to do the work. My team was uniquely qualified in that. We've been together for a while. We were at a period, we had finished accreditation. We were in the midst of, we had finished a campaign almost. The timing worked well, and I had positioned myself for that, and then made the case to my board a year before. And they were very much supportive of the concept.
Great. And that's really what makes a good leader, being able to lead, but if you have to go somewhere else or you have to be absent, know and trust that your team can operate without you, right? So
you know what? And I have to say, Jenna, why this is so important. I think a lot of us make the mistake in leadership roles that we hire the people who think just like us, right? And we surround ourselves with the people. So your your squad, the people that you have with you, they need to be the people who are going to be able to go in the cut with you. And I've taken the time invested in building my team. And as a result of that, I need to be able to say that if I can't walk away for 6 months and entrust and recommend to the board that one of them carry on this work, then I haven't done my job right. I haven't done my job right. So as a college president, as a leader, I knew that. And I had surrounded myself with enough people that I knew, okay, if I walk, there are going to be some things that are going to make different decisions that I may make, but I have to trust and lean into that fact that 2 things are going to happen. Not too much crazy is going to go on while I'm gone, because I get enough calls that they'll still call me. But more importantly, there's nothing that's going to be done that can't be undone. Or more importantly, maybe it was something needed to be done and that I just hadn't had the courage, the gumption, or the will to do it. And that was something that really helped in that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And that really ties back to what you were saying earlier in your talk about how, sometimes taking a step back for self-care is an opportunity for someone else to step up and lead. So that's really great, and a really great point to remember as a leader. And I will say, just as we're kind of waiting for some more questions in the chat, we have a lot of people talking about how they identify so much with the loss of a parent and think it's so wonderful that you were able to choose to be with your father, even though it could potentially impact your career and everything. So I just wanted to mention that.
I'll say to that, Jenna, and to thank you all for acknowledging that, because I do think that a lot of us, there's a certain amount of vulnerability that when you're starting a new job, we all kind of know this. You're like, oh, I'm walking in. You're worried about, I'm one of those kids on still the first day of school. Every fall, we have fall open meeting. I'm planning what I'm going to wear that day, right? So let alone what I'm going to wear, let alone how I wanted to show up. This is my first impression of myself with the college community. And all of a sudden, I'm walking in already trying to make sense of this complex organization. And all of a sudden I'm telling them, oh, guess what, y'all, I'm not going to be here because, and they don't understand. They didn't know my value system yet. We hadn't done that. So I have a number of talented people around me, and they're like, we'll put together this kind of memo to the college. I said, no, this is something I've got to write myself. And I'm a writer, and I was comfortable with that. And I wrote a memo and just simply explained to them that it was important to me that I needed to be there. Didn't take away from the value that I saw in this organization, how excited I was to be there, but what type of daughter and family member, because here's what I believe at the end of the day. I am going to be so mad if I die and on my tombstone it says phenomenal college president. I'm here to tell y'all, I will come back and haunt somebody if it says that. What I wanted to say, dedicated daughter, loving parent, phenomenal lover and wife. I wanted to say she had a great laugh and she was a hell of a girlfriend. She liked good tequila. She could have a good cigar. She had a fascination with tattoos. She was a reader. I wanted to be, she was a thinker, right? Those are the things I wanted to say. If my tombstone or my obituary has something on there about phenomenal college president, that means I didn't live my values. If it says that she was a phenomenal servant of her community, that she believed in access to higher education, if she was a soldier on the side of social justice, that I'm all for that, right? But if it says something about that, because this job at the end of the day, God willing, and the creek don't rise, come 60, it's done. And I'm going to have the ability to go and live my life with my hopeful grandbabies that are years away and touring and spending time with Robin and drinking good wine. That's the type of stuff I want to do. So that to me was, I think the first time you get to decide how you want to show up is when you live your values and exercise that integrity, as Franklin Covey would say, in the moment of choice. Exercise integrity in the moment of choice.
Yeah, definitely great. And then we have another anonymous question that just came in. This person wants to know if you've ever experienced imposter syndrome.
Oh my God, every doggone day. Bless you. Here's the thing, the dirty secret about this. I know at the end of the day, I'm just a little black child from the south side of Chicago. In fact, while I'm looking here, I actually put, I have my formal college bio, and I actually wrote something I put at the end. And I said, most importantly, what does this bio say and about Darian? And what does this bio not say? And in her own words, Darian says, quote, who am I and what do I bring with me? I'm a proud Chicago Public Schools graduate, former food stamps and public assistance recipient, first generation college completer, motherless child and boy mom healed by parenting, loved and loving the most glorious woman in the world for over 30 years, and proud advocate and warrior for all things community college and the students and communities we have the privilege of serving. So there is no way that I don't feel like an imposter because I know my story. I know where I've been. But what I will tell you is that there are days when I underestimate myself and then I have to go back and get grounded by, as Aaron asked, those truth tellers. I go back and I surround myself with inspirational quotes and letters, stories from people that ground me. And when I get really, really having a bad day, I never forget this, y'all. A couple of years ago, I was having one of them days and I got in the car and I'm bawling. And some of y'all may not be able to relate, but I was bawling. And I called my daddy on the phone and I said, Daddy, and I tell him what happened. And he paused. And I could hear him on the phone kind of, and my father's, he's very kind, he's humble, he's this very intentional, deliberate speaker. And he said to me, he said, baby, this the best they got? And I, what? And I said, excuse me, Daddy? And I hear, I had to pull over on the side of the road because I'm crying so hard. And he said, this the best they got? He said, you were prepared for this. They don't know your story. They don't know where you've been. They don't know you. He said, so go ahead and go ahead and deal with this. And I remember that moment. So every once in a while, that imposter syndrome, it shows up mighty. And I wonder, and I look around, then I realize, dearie, you're just not a pretty face, you're a brain. Think your way through this. Talk to some people, network, build it. And at the end of the day, this is the best they got. Oh, okay.
I'm muted. Yeah, that's definitely something that we should all remember when we're kind of feeling like that, because I'm sure everyone experiences it every now and then, especially as women, you know, and women leaders.
Yes. And women can be so hard on each other. Don't let me get started on that. I think some of the most challenging relationships I've had have been from other women doing the work that we know we shouldn't be doing to each other. And we do that. We don't cut each other a break. We don't have, and that's not to say that you have to like every woman, but doggone it, trying to take somebody out because they're another woman, shame on you. Shame, shame, shame on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our next question comes from Dawn Rhodes. So Dawn, go ahead and ask your question.
Sorry, I was taking a bite.
That's okay.
If you had one thing to suggest that women start to do on this journey of self-care, what would be your suggestion for that one thing to start doing?
Whoa, Dawn. See, you just did my see your name Dawn and you did of Dawn. My sister would ask me just one thing. So I would tell you the thing that changed my life, and because I think it becomes a door to other things. It invites you to see your life differently. And I will say the gratitude journal. That changed my life, because when Sarah in the book, she said, write down 5 things or 3 things every day you're grateful for. And I would tell you, Dawn, there were some days when it was hard for me to write down 2. I'd end up saying, oh, it was sunny outside today, or because I wasn't in a mental space. But once I started this journey of there's some days I have to tell myself to stop, because my gratitude journal got so significant, because it wasn't just that it was sunny, it was the way the sun felt on my face and the beautiful way in which I know is feeding my spirit. It became the quick text that my best friend sent me, this meme that had me burst out in laughter in the middle of a meeting. It became the beautiful kiss my son gave me when I walked in the door and he says, Mama, how was your day? It became this invitation to my wife saying, it's your turn to cook dinner, not mine. I was like, oh my God. But that was grateful that I got to have a space where I was able to help my family and be delivered. So for me, the gratitude journal was an invitation for me to see my life differently and to be very intentional about that. And I think then when I was also starting to be grateful, when I ran my first 5K, y'all, and I came back, that was a big thing. When I was able to say, oh, I did the filthy 25, and first time I did, it took me 35 minutes, and now I can do it in 19. There's a thing about that I'm able to see the record of my life as a part of that gratitude journal. So that for me would be the one thing I would say, because it becomes a window to so many of the things that you can do with your life.
Great. And that circles all the way back to live simply and appreciate all that, which is great. We have time for one more really quick question.
Okay.
This is from Martina. So Martina, go ahead and ask your question.
And you're muted, Martina.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi.
Hi.
I came a little late because I had another meeting, but I really appreciate everything that you said. It really resonated with me.
Thank you.
And my question is, can you talk about securing a seat at the table or creating your own table?
So here's what we need to have a whole nother conversation about this. Y'all have me back sometime and we could talk about it, because here's the reality about this. I think you have to do both. I think we have to be able to hold in our heads 2 thoughts at one time. And oftentimes we get stuck on one and versus the other. And in my perspective, this idea of securing your own seat at the table means you have to be prepared for it. One of the things that I see oftentimes, people want to sit at the table, they haven't done their homework. And they don't realize that sometimes you got to bring your own chair. Sometimes you may have to stand up on the side of the room, but that gets you at the table because you understand what the dynamics are when you get to that table, that you have to find a sponsor sometimes who can say, I'm going to scoot my chair over so that you can have a seat at this table. Or more importantly, here's the one you really want, who's going to say, I'm going to get up and let you have the seat at the table. So those are the relationships that you have to cultivate and bring. And then while you are holding this one thought in your mind about working that room and working that table to get your seat at the table, by being prepared, by understanding the dynamics, culture, and expectations, by being the one to work harder when you needed to do that to get to that table, then you're also conversely thinking about preparing your own table. But here's the thing about your own table, then you get to define and set the rules about that. So you start to think about who else needs to be at the table with you. How do you change the dynamics at your table in such a way that other people don't have to fight to be there? How do you decide that your table needs to have a few more seats, and maybe your table is square and not circle? Maybe your table is actually not a table at all. Maybe it's a room or a space that does different things. So in my mind, you cannot yet, I believe, and maybe it's because I had a milestone birthday this year. I turned 50, and as a 50-year-old, I'm stepping into my own truth in a different way. I'm a firm believer that you can't deconstruct a system until you actually know this first system. So you got to know it. You have to know it intimately. The Bible called it an intimacy, right? So you got to understand the system that you want to deconstruct before you go and then construct your own reality. And that's where a lot of us mess up at. We start trying to make our own table without realizing what you over here fighting for, and even what's worth fighting for. There's not enough people there invested in your success. That was a long answer, Martina, but you hit upon something that you have to be able to do two things at one time. And I think oftentimes we get stuck doing one or the other.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think this just means we have to have you back to talk more about this stuff.
All for it.
That's what I'm saying. Dr. Pollard, thank you so much for coming and talking with us. This was a great, and you should scroll through the chat and look at all the comments from everyone, because really so wonderful. Thank you. And so now we're going to move on to the next portion of our event today, where we will be giving out some umbrella awards. So I'm going to turn things over to our Senior VP for External Relations, Jennifer Lichman.
Hello, thank you so much, Dr. Pollard. You have inspired me to be more deliberate about practicing mindfulness and gratitude. And I know that we've all learned that we need to think more about how we want to show up. You have been such an inspiration. So
thank you.
Thank
I appreciate that.
Now I have the great pleasure of introducing Juliet Dickerson, UMB's Interim Associate Vice President for Human Resource Services. Juliet chaired the Umbrella Awards Committee, and she'll announce the winners of Umbrella's 3 inaugural awards, which we will now be giving out each Women's History Month symposium. The first is Person of the Year on the Rise. We have Person of the Year leading the way, and a Champion of the Year. And this is really exciting to all of us, and I'm thrilled to hand the mic over to Juliet.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. This was a great honor to chair the inaugural Umbrella Awards. And we were delighted as a committee because we had such amazing nominees. And when I think back to this empowering, really amazing, awesome presentation that Dr. Pollard just gave for us, when I think back through the 5 points of live simply, give more, expect less, free your mind from worry, and free your heart from hatred, our awardees embody all 5 of these points, but I particularly land on give more for our awardees. And so I'm delighted to announce that for the inaugural Umbrella Awards, our first awardee for Umbrella Person of the Year on the Rise is Michelle Andre from the School of Law. Michelle completed the inaugural cohort of the Umbrella Coaching Program in 2017. She's a member of the President's Council for Women, where she serves on both the Gender Bias and Discrimination and the Gender Equity and Access Committees. Personally, I have so enjoyed working with Michelle as part of our HR Council and on many, many different campus initiatives, and I'm delighted that she was the awardee for this category. Our next award is for the 2021 Umbrella Person of the Year leading the way. And I'm so delighted that Isabel Rambob from the School of Dentistry is the awardee in this category. Isabel has spent the vast majority of her professional career committed to mentoring, coaching, and being such a great role model for professional women. She mentored dental students from 2012 to 2018 on interviewing skills, career plan. Our final award is for the 2021 Umbrella Champion of the Year. And I'm so honored that Sharita Adams, Assistant Dean for Administration and Strategic Initiatives in the School of Social Work, is receiving this inaugural award. Sharita is such a force on this campus in her commitment to career coaching, growth, development, mentorship. She created the UMB Umbrella Group Coaching Program, and that program continues to help hundreds. We've helped hundreds of participants across campus. Before joining social work, she was the go-to person. I remember walking across campus with Sharita on several occasions and not getting more than a half a block at a time because somebody wanted to stop and talk and seek her advice. And so, again, I am delighted to award this to her and to all of the awardees and to everyone who's participated in Umbrella in the programs over the years. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Juliet. And congratulations to all of those award winners. Wonderful job, well-deserved. Congrats, this is great. And so now that's the end of this portion of the program. We're gonna go into another break and we'll be back at 2:30 with our afternoon workshop.